Have you ever wondered how a tiny nation, surrounded on all sides, repeatedly faced armies armed with the most advanced Soviet weapons, tanks, fighter jets, missiles, and yet not only survived, but triumphed? This is not just a military mystery. It is a story that unsettled the Cold War, that humiliated Moscow, and that continues to echo into our present day, where Russian air defense systems, once hailed as invincible, fall silent against Israeli jets. The story begins in June 1967. Across the Middle East, hundreds of Soviet-built MiG fighters stood gleaming on Egyptian airfields. Rows of T-62 tanks rumbled across the desert, and missile defenses loomed like iron guardians in the sand. The Arab world believed they had finally found the power to erase Israel from the map. The Soviets believed their weapons would prove unstoppable. And yet, in just 6 days, Israel not only survived, they shattered that illusion, dismantling armies 3 times their size and changing the balance of power in the Middle East forever. But here is the question that pulls us closer. Was it that Russian weapons were weaker than the world imagined, or was it that Israel had discovered a way to fight that transcended machines? The Second World War had just ended, but peace never truly arrived. Instead, the world split into 2 camps. The United States and the Soviet Union stood as rival giants, each determined to extend its influence into every corner of the globe. And in the middle of this dangerous chessboard lay the Middle East, rich in oil, torn by religion, and seared by centuries of conflict. The Soviet Union moved quickly. They could not allow America and Britain to dominate this vital region. So Moscow offered weapons, training, and political backing to Arab nations hungry for independence and power. To Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, they promised modern armies, fleets of MiG fighters, cutting-edge tanks, and missile systems that Western experts admitted were formidable. By the early 1960s, Egypt alone possessed over 500 Soviet aircraft, hundreds of tanks, and one of the most advanced air defense networks outside of Europe. On paper, it looked unbeatable. But as history would prove, wars are not won on paper.
Israel, by contrast, was a nation born in vulnerability. Every citizen had lived through war, exile, or persecution. Every family knew loss. Survival was not an option, it was the only law. Israeli pilots trained relentlessly, flying until the desert sky became their second skin. Commanders drilled soldiers to think independently, to improvise, to fight with creativity, not blind obedience. And, above all, Israel learned that to lose even once meant extinction. The Soviets built weapons for mass armies, for vast fronts stretching across Europe. Israel built strategies for survival, for striking before being struck, for using intelligence, speed, and ingenuity against overwhelming numbers. This difference, the cold steel of numbers versus the burning urgency of survival, was about to collide. In June 1967, the Arab armies closed in. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan massed troops and tanks around Israel's borders. The world predicted Israel would fall. But at dawn, on June 5th, Israel launched what became one of the most audacious strikes in modern history. In less than 4 hours, Israeli jets destroyed nearly the entire Egyptian Air Force, most of it still sitting on the ground. By the end of that day, Jordan's and Syria's air forces were also crippled. The Arab armies, built on Soviet steel, had been blinded. Without air cover, their tanks became targets. Their soldiers lost direction. Within 6 days, Israel had seized the Sinai, Gaza, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank, tripling its territory. Moscow was stunned. Billions of dollars of military aid had been erased in less than a week. The myth of Soviet invincibility had been shattered. And yet, this was only the beginning.
Why did the weapons that intimidated NATO crumble against Israel? The truth is complicated. Soviet doctrine prized numbers, waves of tanks, fleets of aircraft, massed artillery. Arab armies mirrored this thinking, relying on orders from above, on rigid planning, on overwhelming size. Israel fought differently. They decentralized command, letting junior officers make decisions on the battlefield. They trained pilots not to follow rote instructions, but to outthink their opponents in the sky. They practiced until instinct replaced hesitation. And so, when the moment came, Soviet weapons did not fail mechanically, they failed because the men using them lacked flexibility, while the Israelis had built their survival on it. The Soviet Union could not accept humiliation. After the 6-day war, Moscow rearmed Egypt and Syria with even deadlier weapons, MiG-23s with radar-guided missiles, SAM-6 anti-aircraft batteries that NATO pilots feared, and hundreds of T-62 tanks capable of firing armor-piercing rounds at terrifying range. Egypt's President Anwar Sadat and Syria's Hafez al-Assad prepared for revenge. Their goal was not just to reclaim lost land, it was to erase the shame of 1967. On October 6th, the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, when Israel fasted and prayed, the Arab armies struck. Egyptian forces stormed across the Suez Canal, breaching the Bar-Lev line with water cannons and Soviet explosives. Syrian tanks poured across the Golan Heights, their guns blazing, their crews confident that this time Soviet steel would prevail. At first, it seemed unstoppable. Israeli outposts fell. SAM batteries downed dozens of Israeli jets. Tanks burned in the desert. For a brief, terrifying moment, Israel teetered on the edge of destruction. But then, something extraordinary happened. Israeli soldiers, outnumbered 5-1, began improvising. Tank commanders fired from hidden positions, destroying Syrian armor column by column. Pilots developed daring new tactics to blind Soviet missiles, diving low to escape radar, jamming signals, using deception instead of brute force. Slowly, painfully, Israel turned the tide. Within weeks, the Syrian advance collapsed. Israeli forces crossed the Suez Canal into Egypt. Cairo trembled, Damascus feared the same fate. The Yom Kippur War ended with heavy losses, but also with a chilling revelation. Even when the Soviets poured their best weapons into battle, Israel found ways to adapt, to break, to survive. The world took notice.
For the Kremlin, 1973 was a bitter pill. The SAM-6 had been the pride of Soviet engineers, designed to be the ultimate defense against Western air forces. And yet, Israeli pilots, within days, had learned to evade it. T-62 tanks, once boasted as superior to anything NATO fielded, lay smoldering in the desert, abandoned by crews who fled under Israeli fire. MiG-23s were shot down by smaller, older Mirage fighters, their supposed superiority erased by Israeli ingenuity. Worse, captured Soviet equipment was rushed to the United States. Within weeks, American engineers were studying SAM batteries, MiG cockpits, and radar systems. The secrets of Moscow's arsenal were laid bare not in Europe, but in the deserts of Sinai and Golan. For Moscow, it was not just a military defeat, it was a humiliation. Billions of dollars in weapons sales, credibility with Arab allies, prestige in the Third World, all shaken. And for Israel, it was proof of something larger. Survival depended not on matching the enemy weapon for weapon, but on thinking faster, moving quicker, adapting without hesitation. The lesson would echo for decades. Wars are not only fought with tanks and planes, they are fought in silence, in shadows, in the minds of men who trade secrets for survival. Israel's intelligence service Mossad became legendary during these years. Long before satellites scanned the skies, Mossad agents infiltrated embassies, bribed officers, and listened where no one expected them. It was Mossad that warned of the Arab buildup before 1967. It was Mossad that uncovered Soviet advisors training Egyptian pilots. It was Mossad that turned captured equipment into intelligence gold. But perhaps their greatest achievement was not stealing documents, it was stealing understanding. By placing informants inside Arab governments, by monitoring Soviet shipments, by analyzing every new radar pulse and missile trail, Israel built a map of Soviet doctrine. The Soviets trusted machines, Israel trusted human minds. And time and again, the minds won.
By the 1980s, war was changing. The battlefield was no longer just tanks and planes. It was the invisible world of electronic warfare. The Soviets supplied Syria with new air defense systems, claiming no aircraft could survive them. But in 1982, during the Lebanon War, Israel launched a strike that shocked the world. In just 2 days, the Israeli Air Force destroyed 29 Syrian SAM batteries and shot down over 80 Syrian MiGs without losing a single plane. How? By turning the battlefield into a laboratory. Israeli drones tricked Syrian radars into revealing their positions. Electronic jamming blinded missile guidance systems. Decoys lured Syrian fighters into ambushes. The Soviets were horrified. Systems they had promised as unbeatable had been dismantled with science, creativity, and relentless practice. For the first time, the myth of Russian air defense cracked open for all the world to see. Decades later, the names changed. S-300, S-400, pansier, but the story remained the same. Russia sold these systems as the crown jewels of modern defense, claiming they could deny entire nations access to the skies. Nations lined up to buy them. Syria deployed them. Iran boasted of them. Even NATO planners studied them with unease. And yet, in strike after strike, Israeli jets entered Syrian airspace, destroyed targets, and vanished again, while the much-vaunted Russian air defense systems stayed silent. Some claimed politics explained it, that Russia ordered restraint. But others whispered a harsher truth. Israel had cracked the code. Through intelligence, through cyber warfare, through relentless preparation, they had once again outthought the machines. And so, the same question echoes from 1967 to today. Are Russian weapons as invincible as Moscow claims? Or is Israel simply too determined, too inventive, too desperate to ever lose? The answer may be both. And it is this paradox that makes Israel's survival story one of the most extraordinary of the modern age.
The Cold War was fought not only in Berlin or Vietnam. It was fought in silence, above deserts and seas, where radar pulses met the dark night sky. By the 1990s, Russia's defense industry was collapsing under the weight of the Soviet Union's fall, but its engineers still clung to one promise. Their missiles could stop the Israeli Air Force. Syria bought them. Iran bought them. Even nations far from the Middle East purchased Russian air defense systems, believing Moscow's claim, no Western jet will survive. And yet, night after night, Israeli jets roared into Syrian skies, struck their targets, and disappeared before the missiles could lock on. How? The answer lay not in brute force, but in silence. Israeli pilots flew not against men, but against machines. They studied radar signatures, mapped blind spots, unleashed waves of electronic interference that turned Soviet systems into blind giants. In one strike near Damascus, radar operators swore they saw dozens of incoming aircraft. They fired missiles, filling the sky with explosions. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing. The planes had never been there. They'd been decoys, phantoms painted on screens by Israeli electronic warfare. And when the real jets came minutes later, the Syrian defenses were blind, their magazines empty. The silent war was not just about who had the better machine. It was about who understood that machines could be fooled. And Israel, with survival on the line, had made deception its greatest weapon. Behind every battlefield victory lies a shadow story, alliances forged in silence, partnerships hidden in classified files. After 1973, Israel and the United States became inseparable in matters of defense. Washington supplied jets, radars, and weapons. But what America gained in return was priceless: access to captured Soviet systems. When Israeli commandos seized a Syrian MiG-21, it was flown in secret to an American base. Engineers dissected it piece by piece, learning its weaknesses. When an intact radar system was captured in Lebanon, it was crated, shipped, and studied under American microscopes. This partnership reshaped world warfare. Every Israeli dogfight, every missile evasion, every radar jamming experiment fed into American doctrine. And every American breakthrough in stealth, drones, and satellite surveillance returned to Israel. It was not merely an exchange of weapons, it was an exchange of survival. Israel taught the United States how to face Russian designs in real combat, and the United States ensured Israel would never again fight alone. But alliances come with shadows. Arab states saw every Israeli strike as proof not only of Israeli ingenuity, but of American complicity. Moscow painted Israel as a puppet of Washington, a pawn in the Cold War. Yet the truth was subtler. Israel fought not to serve America's strategy, but to survive. And survival made strange partners.
The battlefield of the 21st century is no longer only sand and steel. It is data. Lines of code, networks humming in silence. As Russia sold its S-300 and S-400 systems to Syria and Iran, Israel shifted its focus. If radars could see, then perhaps their eyes could be blinded, not with smoke, but with code. Cyber warfare became the new frontier. Israeli teams infiltrated networks, probing for weaknesses. Viruses disguised as harmless files crept into defense systems. Communications between missile batteries were intercepted, altered, and delayed. In one reported case, a Syrian radar system displayed a clean, empty sky. Yet above them, Israeli jets streaked toward their targets undetected. The operators never realized their screens had been hacked until bombs fell around them. This was not science fiction. It was the evolution of the same philosophy that had carried Israel from 1967. Weapons are only as strong as the people who wield them. And people, no matter how disciplined, could always be deceived. Cyber shadows blurred the line between peace and war. Strikes were launched without a shot fired. Systems failed without a missile in the sky. And once again, Russian weapons, sold as invincible, were undone not by brute force, but by the unseen hand of deception. Behind every victory, every innovation, every dazzling operation lies a truth harder to speak. War is paid for not only with machines, but with lives. Israeli pilots who flew against Soviet missiles often returned shaken, their planes scarred by shrapnel. Some never returned at all. Tank crews burned in their vehicles. Families waited by the phone, praying for a knock that never came. On the other side, Syrian and Egyptian soldiers died believing in the power of Soviet steel, only to discover its limits too late. Young conscripts manned radar screens, pulling triggers, watching in terror as the systems they trusted failed them. And civilians, ordinary men, women, children, lived with the echo of war above their homes. In Tel Aviv, in Damascus, in Cairo, in Beirut. Each strike, each counterstrike, left scars that no innovation could heal. This is the part of the story rarely told in military histories. The ingenuity of survival is human, but so too is the suffering it inflicts. Israel may have outwitted Russian weapons, but the cost was always human, and those costs linger long after the battlefield falls silent.
Today, the story continues. Russian weapons remain symbols of power, exported to dozens of nations. Israel remains a small country, surrounded by enemies, forever preparing for the next war. And yet, when you peel back the layers of technology and politics, one truth emerges. Survival was never about machines. It was about the human mind. From the boy who first studied Soviet radar signals in a dim Tel Aviv office, to the pilot who risked everything in a midnight dive over Damascus, to the programmer who typed lines of code that blinded an entire defense system, each left an invisible legacy. The legacy is not only military, it is human resilience. It is the reminder that no weapon is invincible, that no machine can outthink determination, and that the smallest nation can outwit the largest empire. But the legacy is also a warning, for in every deception, in every victory, in every triumph of human will over steel lies the shadow of endless conflict, a cycle of innovation and response that never ends. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, what does survival mean? Is it victory in battle? Is it the outsmarting of machines? Or is it something more? The stubborn insistence that life, against all odds, must go on. For Israel, survival became an art form. For Russia, pride became a weapon. For the world, the lesson remains: genius is not in steel, but in spirit. And perhaps in that lies the true shock of this story. Not how Israel defeated Russian weapons, but how humanity, again and again, finds ways to endure.